Let's kick things off with a reunion story that's less a comeback and more a haunting. Quiet Riot spent the early 80s screaming, "Come on, feel the noise," into the stratosphere. Then spent the next 3 decades getting back together, breaking up, and getting back together again. Mostly because Kevin Dubrow just couldn't quit the band bearing his own irony-proof name. He got fired in 1987, came back in 1993, and kept the machine running right up through a 2006 comeback record called Rehab. Then, in November 2007, he was found dead in his Las Vegas home after a cocaine overdose. I discovered 6 days after the fact that should have been the natural stopping point. Instead, in 2014, surviving drummer Frankie Banali released an album literally titled Quiet Riot 10, featuring 0 original members and Dubrow's old vocals lifted from archived tapes, reuniting with a ghost. That's either dedication or just really bad boundaries. You decide. Next up, a band that's turned reunion into a permanent legal proceeding. Ratt Round and Round was the song. Round and Round is also, unfortunately, the plot of their entire post-80s history. Stephen Pearcy quit in 1992. The band splintered, and what followed was a genuinely staggering parade of lineups, lawsuits, and countersuits, including one where drummer Bobby Blotzer toured as Ratt with 0 classic era members, while the actual founders fought him in court over who legally owned the name. Pearcy has sued former bandmates. Former bandmates have sued Pearcy right back. At one low point, there were literally 2 competing versions of Ratt playing Round and Round in different cities on the same night. Even after Pearcy and Blotzer buried the hatchet in 2021, guitarist Warren DeMartini walked away from the whole thing entirely. Pearcy himself eventually admitted the real problem. Too many cooks, not enough kitchen. Every reunion just resets the lawsuit clock. Sticking with the "there can be 2 of us" theme, let's talk Great White. Frontman Jack Russell spent years battling addiction alongside a string of serious injuries, including a shattered pelvis. And in 2011, his bandmates decided the show had to go on without him. Russell disagreed, loudly, and in 2012 sued his own former band for the rights to the name. His ex-bandmates countersued right back, claiming his self-destructive lifestyle was actively damaging the brand. After a year of legal back and forth, they landed on the most confusing possible compromise. The original guys kept touring as Great White, and Russell got to tour as Jack Russell's Great White, both playing the same 80s hits to audiences who, by guitarist Mark Kendall's own admission, sometimes genuinely couldn't tell the 2 apart. 2 bands, 1 legacy, 1 very confused fan base squinting at concert posters. Somewhere out there, a ticket buyer is still trying to figure out which one they actually paid for. Now here's a reunion that didn't implode in a lawsuit or a punch-up. It just kind of fizzled. Asia was rock's original supergroup, built from members of some of prog rock's biggest names, and their 1982 debuts sold millions off the strength of heat of the moment. So when singer John Wetton reunited that classic lineup in 2006, expectations were enormous. Fans wanted another massive, radio-ready hit to match the old glory days. What they got instead was Phoenix, an album critics politely described as bringing little of the energy anyone had hoped for, followed by a string of respectable but largely forgettable records that barely dented the charts. No scandal, no fistfight, just steadily diminishing returns until Wetton's death from cancer in 2017 quietly closed the book for good. It's the reunion equivalent of a firework that gets lit, fizzes for a second, and just doesn't go off. Sometimes the saddest ending isn't a blow-up. It's a shrug. Jefferson Airplane's 1989 reunion is a genuinely wild story. Mostly because, by Grace Slick's own admission, it started as a prank. She snuck on stage during a Hot Tuna show just to mess with Paul Kantner. This despite the fact there were, in her words, 15 or 20 active lawsuits tangled up between various members at the time over the Airplane name, and its royalties. Somehow that prank turned into a full self-titled reunion album and tour. The tour did fine, the album did not. Critics called Side 2 a middle-aged mess of competing egos, each member fighting for studio real estate rather than actually making music together. It sold modestly, satisfied nobody creatively, and the classic lineup never regrouped again except for a brief, dignified handshake at their 1996 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. Started as a joke on Paul Kantner, ended as a footnote in the band's own history. Somewhere, Grace Slick is still laughing about it. The Byrds' 1973 reunion might be the textbook example of hype outrunning reality. Getting all 5 original members back in a studio together felt so monumental at the time that one critic later compared it to imagining the Beatles themselves getting back together in a studio. David Geffen threw serious money at the sessions. The record sold decently on nostalgia alone, and then everyone actually sat down and listened to it. Rolling Stone's John Landau called it one of the dullest albums of the year. Fans complained that McGuinn's signature ringing 12-string guitar was barely on it at all. The band members themselves have spent decades since publicly trashing their own record, admitting the sessions were rushed and the songs simply weren't there yet. A planned tour to support the album never even materialized. 5 legends, one label's checkbook, and an album that proved conclusively that getting the guys back in a room isn't the same thing as songwriting. Let's talk about the reunion disappointment that somehow still made Kiss a fortune. Psycho Circus. After the wildly successful 1996 reunion tour, the original foursome promised fans their first true studio album since 1979's Dynasty. The marketing was everywhere. The reality was very different. Peter Criss only actually played drums on one song. Ace Frehley played guitar on maybe 3 tracks total. The rest was handled by session musicians, including Ace's own future replacement, Tommy Thayer, quietly playing his parts for him. Criss later claimed in his own memoir that he and Frehley were each paid $850,000, specifically not to be in the studio. Producer Bruce Fairbairn reportedly didn't love what he heard from them in rehearsal, and moved on without much fanfare. So the big, triumphant reunion album wasn't really a full reunion at all, just 4 famous faces on a lenticular cover, with a very expensive session band underneath. Vintage Kiss, honestly. Now here's a reunion that technically wasn't even a reunion, and that was exactly the problem. 2002, surviving Doors members Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger hit the road again, minus original drummer John Densmore, and obviously minus the late Jim Morrison, replaced on stage by former Cult frontman Ian Astbury. They called themselves the Doors of the 21st century, and plastered Morrison's face across the merchandise regardless. Densmore, along with Morrison's family, promptly sued, arguing the name and imagery required unanimous agreement from every surviving member. The case dragged through court for 2 full years. In 2005, a judge sided with Densmore, banned the group from using the Doors name in any form, and ordered Manzarek and Krieger to pay a combined $5.2 million in damages and legal fees. The band limped on briefly as Riders on the Storm before quietly dissolving for good. Turns out, you can replace the singer, but you can't replace the rest of the band's patience. Now we're getting into the truly legendary disasters. Starting with Van Halen's 2004 reunion with Sammy Hagar. On paper, this was massive. 80 shows, huge grosses, the return of the Van Hagar era after 8 years apart. Behind the curtain, according to Hagar himself, it was a nightmare. He's since called it the worst experience of his entire life, saying Eddie Van Halen was, in his words, completely whacked out on alcohol and drugs. To the point, some nights Hagar couldn't recognize which song Eddie was even playing. 40 shows in, Hagar wanted out entirely. Genuinely fearing Eddie might die right there on stage, he couldn't leave anyway. His own contract would have forced him to personally repay the band's lost earnings, so he finished all 80 shows, watched a friend unravel in real time, and the reunion collapsed again shortly afterward. Big grosses, bigger scars. Eddie and Sammy patched things up eventually, years later. But that tour left marks that never fully healed. And we're closing with the reunion that ended in the most literal way possible. A fist fight on camera, mid-song. And Jane's Addiction reunited their so-called Core 4 for their first tour together in a full 14 years back in 2024. It was going fine. Right up until a September show in Boston during the song Ocean Size, when Farrell suddenly slammed his shoulder into Navarro mid-solo and threw a punch in front of thousands of fans, all captured on a dozen phone cameras. Crew members and Avery had to physically restrain Farrell and drag him off stage. The show ended 11 songs early. Days later, the remaining 3 canceled the rest of the tour, citing Farrell's continuing pattern of behavior and mental health struggles. Lawsuits followed on both sides. Navarro has since said flatly, there's no chance the band will ever play together again. Some reunions end quietly. This one ended with a punch and a lawyer. So there you have it. 10 rock reunions that promised redemption and delivered chaos, lawsuits, or plain disappointment instead. I get the appeal. Nostalgia's a hell of a drug, and every fan wants one more shot at the classic lineup. But as we just saw, getting the band back together is usually where the real trouble starts. Did I miss a reunion disaster that belongs on this list? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. And if classic rock runs through your veins like it does mine, hit subscribe, and let's keep this going.